Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for spending the time to uh, join with me today. We're going to take a pretty deep dive into distributor differentiation. And as usual, we'll give a couple minutes for everybody to join. So we'll do some housekeeping until they are. I'm going to try to keep an eye on comments on YouTube on my phone while we present on my computer so that I can figure out if there's questions. And sometimes Andrew can help me out with those as well. Want to say thank you to Arrived, to River Drive, and White Labs for helping to keep the spring virtual conference free, and to Andrew for all of his hard work in putting everything together. It's really cool to see how this has evolved. And Andrew just said 5 years, I think. That he's been putting this together. But certainly the last two have been key to having more people focused and online so that this virtual option can grow. So super cool to see all of the presenters that are part of this schedule, and pleased to be part of that. Always do a couple of things. Let's do the who am I part. You can kind of wander through that, and by the time we get through that, most people should have joined us and we can start our dive into distribution. I've started introducing myself more as a tour guide in craft beer just because I have worn so many hats over time. I started in the industry on the distribution tier, which is a little bit unusual. My brother owned a distribution company, and so I really learned with my feet in the warehouse. I did a lot of loading trucks. I did a lot of invoice entry and collections. I worked with our suppliers. Um, I delivered beer. I had my own little route for a while. So I really wore all the hats in the distribution tier. And so I ended up writing a book about my experience for craft brewers, so that there was a more of an understanding about that middle tier and how you can work in partnership with your distributors to collectively succeed. But my journey has taken me many places, and the Big Beers Festival was born while I was working in distribution. That's still going, pandemic notwithstanding. We're hoping to be able to come back in 2023. So cross your fingers and your toes and do whatever pandemic dances we need to do to make that happen. Then I moved into the Vale Cascade, which still, well, I guess it's not called the Vale Cascade anymore, but a destination resort environment, and ended up creating their craft beer program. That was the coolest job ever. If you had a bad day, hide in the cooler and do inventory. And I loved working with all of the customers and the purchasers and all of the reps and creating events and doing education for the staff. It was just the coolest project ever. And I ended up moving out of being an employee at the Cascade and still managing their program, creating programs for Gateway Canyons, for Beaver Run, for other resorts as well, and doing a lot of different stuff under the umbrella of customized craft beer programs. I did some fantastic events with craft beer and brewing. That's why I've got them on my little map there. We did some brewers retreats at some fabulous resorts. We did, and they're still doing the new brewery accelerator. Yeah, new brewery accelerator program workshop. I think I got tongue tangled there. But I've worked with a ton of different organizations to do beer education. I did a cool diabetic tasting with the Falling Rock team. Just lots of neat things under the umbrella. Worked with the BA for Savor and GABF. And all of that kind of comes together in a new venture, a pandemic venture that I'm doing with my friend Candace Moon of the Craft Beer Attorney. And that's called Start a Brewery. So we've created a website, pulled together resources from so many different peers in the arena and the broad spectrum of what is craft beer. And that's a free resource for anybody who's dreaming, starting, or maybe expanding their brewery. So let's get on with the deep dive here. So we're going to set the scene first. So when we're talking about distributor differentiation, it's really good to take a quick look at setting the scene. Why would you need a distributor, and when would you need a distributor? And the shorter answers to that is when you can't do it yourself. Why would you need a distributor? If you're doing more than you can in your immediate initially conceived business, whether that's brew pub, tap room, just packaging, brewery, you need somebody to get that beer out for you. And you can do a lot of that yourself. And we'll talk about self-distribution in a lot of points here. But the best way to learn about distribution is to do self-distribution on your own. And when that becomes painful, when you're spending more time and more energy and more resources on actually distributing your beer than you are making it, and that's what you're doing this for. You're doing it because you want to make beer. When you're spending more time and energy and money on distributing it, it's time to get someone else to do that. So that's kind of the why and the when. What essentials must be in place before you look into distribution options? This is something that often gets shortcutted. You need to really make sure that you have all of your ducks in a row, that they're all present. And some of the things that are super important fall under the category of knowing who you are. You need to know what your costs are. What does it cost you to make a case of beer? What does it cost you to put together a keg of beer to sell? That includes your utilities, the lights, your labor. That includes everything. And what can you produce? What do you bring to the table? Have you already created your brand? You need to have created a brand in this day and age before you actually approach a distributor. What kind of volume of beer can you provide? What kind of sales support can you provide to the distributor? And if you can, build your brand. And in today's world, you really need to build your brand ahead of looking for a distributor as much as you possibly can in order to have the most control over the conversation and the best chance of getting the distributor that you want to work with as a partner. So you really need to dial in who you are, where you are financially, what you can provide, all of the pieces before you sit down with the distributor. What other distribution options are there? So we've seen a lot of different things, especially with the pandemic lately, and a lot of loosening of restrictions that were present before. So, for example, you might call distribution curbside pickup. You might call it home delivery. In some places, we were allowed to do that. You are doing e-commerce on your website. We can do a lot more of shipping directly to consumers than we used to. There's organizations like Bev, where you can sign up to be part of their website. They'll let you know when they sold some of your beer, and you can ship it directly to the consumer. The Beer of the Month clubs. There's a whole lot of ways to get your beer out to your consumer than there used to be. And it's going to be interesting to see how many of those stay in play once we get past the remnants of pandemic style business here. Some of these things, some of these exceptions, I think are here to stay. And some of them will be going by the wayside or no longer being legal. But I think it's important to look and see what other options there are in addition to formal distribution. It's really tough right now to find a great distribution partner. And so looking at other options to grow your brand is a good thing as you get started. So now that we've set the scene, let's look at what all distributors do. And this is important when we're differentiating. These things will be true for all distributors. They all purchase their clients' products. They all maintain an inventory of their clients' products. What kind of inventory they maintain is important, but they all maintain some sort of inventory in order to be able to deliver on your behalf. They all take orders for these products in various ways. Some of it's electronic, some of it is the person walking into the store or the restaurant or the establishment, the business, and taking that order. They all deliver the orders in appropriate ways and times, and they all collect payment for the products. So all of that is essential fundamentals of being a distributor. Now, that's really stripped down from what it used to be. When I first was in the distribution business, there was a whole lot more than that went on. And now I've seen contracts the contracts basically strip down the distributor responsibilities to this and this only. So be aware that all the other things that you may think are part of a distributor's responsibility, they may not agree. So you need to be 100% dialed in on what you each agree that the other is supposed to be doing. So let's take a look at what else some distributors do. And these are things that I thought, and I still think good distributors do. Um, but everybody has a different idea of business success and what it takes to be successful. And your distributors are businesses too, and they want to succeed. But I think distributors should, and most distributors still do, some level of actively building your brand with you. Um, it used to be that a lot of brewers thought that as soon as you signed that contract, you could basically fire your entire sales team because the distributor sales team was now your sales team. Not true. Really not true now. Now you need your sales team plus their sales team, and that's expensive. So doing business with a distributor, remember you're losing margin. You have to package first, which is losing some of your margin. Then you have to ship it to the distributor, which is losing more margin. Then you have to sell it to the distributor, which is losing significant margin. Working with a formal distribution agreement partner is not an inexpensive prospect, and it's something you want to do last. It's not something you want to do first. First, you want to sell as much as you can of your product over your bar with no packaging. That's the way to do it. So anyway, let's move on. Um, some distributors actually do tastings with buyers, which is essential for a craft product. If you have a macro product like a Bud Miller Coors, everybody kind of knows what those taste like. With craft beer, it's really important to actually taste the beer with the buyers. Um, that takes time for a salesperson. And so it's something that needs to be very clear that you expect those salespeople to take that time in order to sell your brand well. Um, good distributors introduce your products, keep you in mind, include you in conversations with their buyers. Certainly not in every conversation, certainly with not every buyer all the time, every day, but frequently, often, regularly, and you're part of their active buying program. Um, Distributors can inventory and post POS and accounts. So if you have coasters, keychains, stickers, camp chairs, neons, tin tackers, shelf talkers. All of that stuff is good and really helps the sales reps to sell your product. And some distributors just don't put a priority on it. They're not willing to co-op some of the cost for that, and just don't care. They don't make it available or push it to their sales reps. You really want them to. You really want to provide this, and you really want there to be a priority on using these things to help to grow your brand. Do tastings in liquor stores for customers. Certainly with the pandemic, we have not seen as much of that. None of that, and it's coming back slowly. I don't know with what speed, but when we get back to something resembling normal, being present, having your product present in front of the customers as they shop in a store is a really good way to get them to try your product and then sell some. So it's a really good thing to do. And if your distributor is actively representing your beer, they may be willing to do those tastings in the stores for you as well. So you need to ask those questions. They also represent your brand at events and festivals. That used to be normal. It is no longer normal. And I think it's probably a pretty rare distributor that goes to festivals and represents for their portfolio of brands, but some do. Check the dates of inventory and accounts. I think this is most important if you have floor stacks or if your logistics chain doesn't have refrigeration. So if your product is being stored warm in the warehouse or warm for long distances in trucks, you start to see more erosion of your quality of your shelf life. So I think this is really important. Know what you're getting into. Know whether they're going to be refrigerated all through that process, or if you're going to have a lot of floor stacks and a lot of displays that would be cutting your shelf life short. You want them to be paying attention and checking this for you. If you've got some distributor partner who's not engaged and they don't care and they are not checking up on their people, you may have bad beer in a store and nobody will ever know it. And your one-time consumer who's going to try something new today has a bad first experience. You never want that to happen. Some distributors proactively work with you to solve inventory and account issues. Say their warehouse is out of one of your beers. You may lose some shelf spots or tap handles. Are they willing to let you know that, help you figure that out and get some product to them? Are they going to let you know if there's a problem in an account, that there's a bad customer experience, or you had some cans exploding or something? Are they going to tell you? Are they going to help you fix that and maintain that account? So these are some things that really good distributors do. And there's some things you want to know about, and they're going to make a big difference in how your brand sells. So now that we've kind of set things up, this is where we get into, how do I tell what kind of distributor or distribution relationship this would be during the interview process? The $1,000,000 question of the day. And the answers are: do your homework first, ask good questions, and be observant. There's lots of components here. Doing your homework. So this, again, this whole process is something people often skip, but this is a big one. You really, really, really want to know, before you walk in to sit down with the distributor, what are the brands they currently carry in their portfolio. You want to give some good thought to that. You want to think through, what are the brands that are most like yours or would be most competitive with yours, that those sales representatives are going to be selling and choosing who to represent or who to sell into an account, or for that tap handle, or for that shelf spot. Are you most different from everybody, or are you really unique? You would add something truly different into this distributor's portfolio. Knowing what brands they currently carry will inform your presentation approach. Talk to other brewers or brewery reps who are in the market. Spend a day, spend 2, spend 3. Get to know who's in the market. Look and see who's on the shelf. Contact their people. See them if you see a sales rep for a specific brewery in the market as you're doing your own research, or give a call to other brewers that you see represented in the market and ask what they think about their distributor, if this is their distributor you're going to talk to, or what their impression is about that distributor. If you're seeing people in the liquor store where you're hoping to be, ask them. Talk to retailers on and off premise. So basically ask anybody who's willing to talk to you, what do they think about this distributor? Do they like their sales reps? Do they like their drivers? Are they on time? Are they responsive? Do they return your calls? Do they fix problems? If there's a draft problem for a restaurant or a bar, are they quick to resolve it? Do they have a lot of product outages? There's a lot of questions you can ask everyone. And make sure when you're talking to retailers that you're talking to both on and off premise. You don't want to just make decisions based on off premise, and you don't want to just make decisions based on whether you see tap handles and accounts on premise. You want to talk to both. Find out what that impression is on all levels, because you'll find that they're very different. I mean, nobody's going to get 100%, but a lot of people will get 90. And so if you only talk to 2 people, you're not going to get 90%. You're going to get 100% or 50%. So make sure you mix it up and talk to a lot of people to get a different impression from different people who are working with those distributors in different ways. And last and most obviously, learn everything you can from the internet. So websites, social media, mentions on retailers' websites, mentions on brewers' websites. Where did they come up when you Googled them? And don't just do first page, do second page, third page. Find out where they're coming up. Read the story. Look to see where they show up on the website. Is it positive? Just a really good idea to learn whatever you can before you sit down and talk to anybody. You can also find some hotspots. Did they have some problems? How did they resolve that? How did they address that? If they have a website, do they have a blog? That way you can see more opinion and personal insight, which is really interesting. Be observant. There's so much you can learn just by watching. You just have to make sure you get to the spaces where you can watch and then kind of know what you're looking for. So always, always, when you're interviewing with a distributor, insist on a tour of their warehouse and their offices. And if it's not a good day to do that, ask when you can come back to do that. It's important to see how their business works. It's important to see how their people are interacting with each other. It's important to see how organized it is or isn't. It's important to see, is it refrigerated? you know, just 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 all the things. Um, Meet as many people as possible. Are they positive? Do they seem confident? Are they grounded? Are they hiding? You don't want them hiding. Um, Kind of keep your eyes open for resources. Do they, how electronic do they appear to be? How manual do their systems appear to be? Um, Same thing with the offices. Are you seeing technology? How is it working? Do you see people that appear to have been there for a long time? Or does everybody seem to be new and kind of lost? All of these things will kind of factor into your big impression of who is this company. Ask about doing ride-alongs with sales representatives or with drivers and with drivers. The most you can see in action in terms of customer interaction, peer interaction, the interaction between the sales reps and the drivers, the interactions between sales reps and other sales reps for different companies or with other breweries. So many different things you can learn. The organization level of the employee, whether it's the sales rep or the driver, what's their um, respect level, efficiency level with the customer, consideration level, um, how organized is the truck? Did they have a lot of missed pulls? Is the sales representative proactively taking calls and solving problems, or does everything go to voicemail? And that's a hard one because you're traveling with them, so they probably don't want to deal with a lot of that with you. So just be observant, learn from everything that you see. Would you want your product to be carried by these people? Ask good questions. Looks like my slide kind of got munched a little bit, so we'll see. Anyway, we'll break it down. We're going to get into a lot of different areas here. Business philosophy, market approach to accounts, craft versus macro, beer versus other, whose name is on the door, portfolio favorites and mind share, size stereotypes, accountability, goals and ABP, willingness to solve problems, supplier cooperation in the market. And then what happens if your brand is stagnant with this distributor, and what happens if it's too successful? There is such a thing. So let's dive in. Business philosophy. So by this I mean, what is the attitude of the management or the ownership about craft beer? Do they like it? Not necessarily as a beverage themselves personally, but are they knowledgeable about it? Do they appreciate it? Do they respect it? Are they passionate about the business of building brands? So a good side note, sometimes people are in the business of craft beer distribution to make money. And sometimes people are in the business to build something they love and be part of the industry that they love. And there's a lot to respect on both sides of that. But it's really hard if you have all of one or the other. If you've got somebody who really, really, really loves what they do, they probably have really knowledgeable reps as well, but they really don't have much of a clue about the business of things. That gets to be a problem. That gets to be a problem for finances. It's a problem for timeliness. It's a problem for just professionalism across the board. And so it's just know where your challenges may be if you've got some people who are super psyched but seem a little bit lost when it comes to being professional. And the same in reverse. If you've got people that, here's my little list about margins, billbacks, deadline samples, breakage, and expired beer. If you've got people who can only think about numbers and don't really appreciate the art and the craft of beer, or are only interested in wine and liquor and, oh yeah, we should carry beer too, maybe that's a stumbling point. What you really want is you want a balance. You want a balance of appreciating and respecting and valuing craft beer at the same time that they're good with the business side of things and knowledgeable that all of those numbers make a difference and that we need to be accountable and reviewing and on top of the reports to see how things are doing and that the data matters. So if you've got a good combination, that's a winner, at least in this category. The market approach. Do they value all liquor licenses in their territory? So we got into this a little bit this morning in Julie's presentation about whether all areas and all kinds of accounts are being considered. Sometimes you'll run into a distributor who doesn't go to one area of town because it's not a good fit. Why? Sometimes you'll run into distributors who only call on the large accounts. They don't want to take the time, they don't have the bandwidth, they don't have the staff to do the little accounts. Um, they have their business model, but you need to be concerned about where you want your beer to be sold. And if there are ways to leverage sales and build your brand that they are not going to ever see. If there's ways to build your brand that this distributor is never going to actually use, you're not going to grow the way that you might. And so that's valuable to consider. Does this distributor prefer on-premise or off-premise? I've run into a large number of distributors who seem to be all on or all off. And I'm not really sure what that's about, but it's really good to have a balance. You really want the visibility in the restaurant and in the bar, and you really, really, really want people to easily be able to find you when they're done with their dining or they're entertaining and they're going home. So you want both. If you have a distributor who's almost all restaurants and bars, then you've got super social late night reps that may not be able to make an 8 o'clock appointment with a liquor store. That's kind of what that says to me, is that the preference is to be the late night social, and the preference is not to be just the business-like piece of the liquor stores. And it's true, all reps will prefer one or the other. You may have reps with a family who really want to be done at 5 or 6 o'clock, and they really don't want to go call on the bars who don't want to see them until 7. So just be knowledgeable about how that works and what that means for the growth of your brand. Do they have obvious favorite accounts? There have been many stories about sales reps who only called on one account or only called on half a dozen accounts and just hung out there for the day. So be kind of cognizant, especially if you're doing ride-alongs. Are they taking you to their favorite accounts and then you're going to play pool for the rest of the afternoon? Or are you going to see a mix of accounts? Are you going to really see that people are working the area that they've been assigned? If you've got obvious favorite accounts and that's where they, earn their bread and butter, and those people order enough product from them to make their paycheck, that's great, but that's not where you want to go for growth. And the people that are managing those sales reps need to be holding them accountable. And if that's not happening, then that's a bigger problem than just that sales rep. Place all brands in all accounts. This is another one that flashes back to Julie's discussion this morning. There's very often a stereotypical association of this liquor license, wine bar, not a place where I should be selling craft beer. Why not? There are lots of people that go with friends to places that don't like the same thing their friends like. So if you're a beer drinker, but you have a whole bunch of wine drinking friends and they take you to a wine bar, you're going to be super psyched to see that craft beer on the menu. And you, as the craft beer owner, want to be that person on the menu. So if you've got sales reps that think that, of course, you belong in this account and of course you don't belong in that account, that's kind of a dangerous limitation as well. Preconceived notion of perennial success or failure in specific areas of the territory. Kind of the same thing, but this is usually more about price point, or type of beer. Like this area of town only drinks macro. This area of town doesn't drink craft. Well, why is that? Is that because there's no craft on the shelf, or there's just a lousy collection of craft on the shelf? Maybe it's time to push a little bit and see if you can get a little bit more traction there. Craft versus macro and beer versus other. Does the same sales team sell craft as macro products? This is super important. I cannot overstate this. Small distributors, particularly those that limit themselves to craft products, are usually very savvy about how to sell craft beer. A distributor who sells a lot of Anheuser-Busch or Coors products, Miller Coors, their sales reps may not really understand that there's a difference in how you sell the product. You don't sell Bud Miller and Coors the same way that you sell a craft beer. And if the same sales team is selling both, you need to find out how. Are there certain days that they're doing tastings with their buyers and the other days they're just going in and doing orders? So they're calling on the same account twice. How are they pulling that off? Because most of the people, particularly those who have been, for decades representing one or both of the macro, well, that's not fair, either representing AB or Miller Coors, they walk in, they look at the coolers, they look at the floor stacks, they look at the shelves, they write down their orders, they wave at the buyer, and they walk out the door. That's awesome that they've developed that level of trust. That's not how you sell craft beer. In craft beer, you're visiting with the buyer, you're sitting down, you're doing tastings, you're evaluating shelf placements, and you're bargaining with that for macros too. But you don't have 6 different kinds of packages of the same product. Yours are all different. And your buyer needs to know that and be cognizant of how different beers are going to sell. There's just so much more involved in selling craft. And so the winning team, the winning organization, I guess, that I have seen is a larger company, but with a craft division, so that there's a craft division sales team that is selling craft, because it's so different than selling macro products. And then I guess to that same question, does the same sales team sell beer as other beverages and products? If you have the same team selling beer as you do liquor and wine, that can be problematic too. A lot of the people I know that have for their whole career been selling liquor and wine don't want to have anything to do with selling a, $20 case of beer. They just $10, whatever, $30 case of beer. They don't want to have anything to do with it. They're more interested with an $80, $100, $150, $250 case of wine. There's a whole lot more commission on that case. And beer is a volume product. So it's not the same approach. It's not the same mentality. And they need to care. Some do. Some love that. But not everybody. And then are they knowledgeable about how to sell craft well? I kind of already covered that. Does their sales team like craft beer? Not necessarily do they need to drink it, but is it obnoxious? Is it something that's in their way? Or is it something that they appreciate, that they understand they get more margin on that than they would on a Bud Miller Coors case? Do they make enough commission from craft to focus on it? And I think that's probably the key. Those who feel like it's worth their while are the ones that are going to take the time. Either that or they love it and they're going to take the time anyway. But if there's peanuts for commission and they don't really like it and they can sell a whole lot more Budweiser stacks in the same amount of time, you're not going to get that focus. Whose name is on the door? Are they an independent wholesaler? This is a big deal, I think. If you are working with a Bud Miller Coors house, you need to understand that their first obligation is going to be to meeting the goals that are set by those companies. Are they accountable to external commitments that would interfere with getting your product mind share? So this is maybe not just Anheuser-Busch, and maybe not just Miller Coors, but are there other commitments that they have made? Are their largest brands holding them hostage? Are there commitments that they've made to those brands that would preclude them from selling yours or putting the focus on yours that you need? Super important to know those things. It doesn't make any sense to sign a contract with this particular distributor if they have committed all of their focus and all of their mind share somewhere else. They need to be able to guarantee you that you're going to be able to succeed in this market and that they're going to do their damnedest to make sure that happens, or you don't want to partner with them. So to that point, can they feature your products and or run promotions successfully? You need to know that there's going to be an opportunity for success. And then would it hurt the company in any way if your brand were a success? And this flashes me back to when all of a sudden craft beer took off and a lot of the Anheuser-Busch wholesalers were seeing so much success with the sales of craft beer that their sales for their AB products were suffering. And, the company came around and said, well, then we're just going to buy some craft breweries so that we make that margin and we can focus on our own businesses. But it really did hurt the distributors who were doing so well with craft beer when Anheuser-Busch got so upset with them. So is there a penalty for you succeeding is the question. And if your success is somebody else's penalty, they're just not going to be rooting for you the whole way. Portfolio favorites and mind shares. Which of their products would they view your products to compete with for shelf space? This is a really important thing to be asking the distributor in your interviews. It's important to know how they view your product, and this will tell you. If you think that you're comparable with a New Belgium in their portfolio, and they think you're comparable with a really small brewery who's very not well known, they're thinking of them in different ways, and they're not thinking of you in the way you want to be considered. That's important to know. Is it plausible to believe that their reps would recommend your brand over the other on an equalish basis? So same question. You want the New Belgium handle. Are they going to be rooting for you to take the place of this smaller brand's handles, and so they're never going to consider you for a bigger brand handle? That's that's one of those things. You need to know what kind of mind share you're going to get. Do they have a contractual agreement to not bring in competing brands? I find that this is not contractual usually. It's usually more understood or a verbal agreement. But if they're hesitating on bringing you on because you're going to compete with one of their brands that they consider or they obviously hold in really high esteem, you might want to consider the fact that you might not get the mind share that you want from them. Does your brand fit their style of products, or would it benefit from being unique? This is where it's interesting to say, if your craft beer brand goes into a distributor that carries specialty wines, are you their only craft beer or one of very few? Or are you the only cider in their portfolio or their only seltzer? Will you then get, obviously, all of the placements that come the way of this representative, this sales rep, or this team of sales reps in the market? So if they're talking to their buyers in their wine shops or in their specialty wherever shops, and they say, oh, I'm really looking for craft beer too, but you guys don't have anything. And they say, oh, yes, we do. Is that going to be you every time? There's a lot to be said for that. The negative side of that is that you might not come up in conversation most of the time because you're not who they're focusing on. They're focusing on wine. You're kind of a sidecar. So, think about how that would work and talk to them. Talk to the distributor about how that would work. Size stereotypes. If big, how do they propose to give you mind share and sales rep education and cooperation? So there's some serious advantages to big distributors. But the biggest downside is, how are their sales reps handling a large portfolio? Are they going to actually be able to commit to you that their sales reps are going to know that you exist and that your name is going to be mentioned, that they're going to take orders for your products, and that they're going to be aware that you exist? And that's the biggest. You don't want to get lost. And so it's a serious negative if they can't really tell you why or when their sales reps would learn about your beer or would promote your beer. Will the reps have time to taste the buyers on your products? If they're crazy busy and they have a huge number of accounts per rep, and you can ask that, is there time to do tastings? If not, how are they going to sell your beer? Is there room on the promotional calendar? Because that's often when you get the mind share of the sales rep, is when you're on promo, and that's not legal in all states. But if you are on promotion, that's the time when a lot of tasting happens. Hey, guess who we're focusing on this month? It's going to be XYZ brand, and you really need to taste their products to understand what they're doing. It's really cool. That's what you need. If there's no promotional calendar, if there's no opportunity for feature, even if there's no discounts, there should be an opportunity for feature or focus. How can you be assured that this big distributor is ever going to pay attention to your little brand? And I mean little in a relative sense. Anybody is little when you're faced with Anheuser-Busch or Miller Coors. Why are they going to focus on you? So on the flip side, if you're talking to a small distributor, Can they promise you reliable cash flow? Are they going to be able to pay you on time for your product? And are they going to be able to keep enough product in inventory? That's tough for little guys. Very, very often, little distributors are run by passion and they're not well funded. And that comes through in payments to you. And you're generally not a larger player. You need that cash flow. So pay attention to that. And if they're small, do they hit enough accounts to be successful for your brand? So here we're back to, are they just highlighting the biggest accounts and ignoring all the little ones? And that may be okay. That may be enough. But you may not prefer that and need to weigh that carefully. Accountability goals and ABPs. Will they commit to growth targets and regular accountability to hit them? This is where you're looking at the business side of things, the numbers, the data. Are they paying attention? Or are they always running around on a crisis, with a fire extinguisher putting out all the fires, and they're never sitting down to look at the reports? Because you need them to look at reports, and you need them to be able to return your calls, and you need them to be able to focus if your beer isn't selling. And so they need to commit, and they need to be accountable, and they need to promise you and show you and tell you how they will be. How do they communicate their goals to their sales team? So in your ABP meeting or at the beginning when you're signing the contract, they'd be making all these commitments, but how do they relate those commitments? How do they translate those commitments to their sales team? Are they setting their sales team goals? And if the goals that they've promised you are not coming through, is that because their sales team doesn't know or doesn't understand or isn't getting the message? How motivated are they to adjust mid-quarter or mid-year if their numbers are off? It takes a little time, takes some focus, takes some diligence, takes some creativity. Are they willing to be a good enough partner with you to focus on that? It's important. Will they take the time for an in-depth ABP, sorry, that's supposed to be a B like boy, annual business plan review, and cooperative goal setting session? It's not just going through the motions, it's actually digging in and thinking through the process, thinking through what's working and what's not, making commitments, changing the trajectory, whatever's necessary to improve things. You need that focus. They need to be willing to do that with you. Willingness to solve problems. Who's in charge of the on-premise draft issues? Is that you? No, it's them. But who on the distribution level is in charge of taking care of the beer that's not pouring? Is that the sales rep? Do they have a draft tech? Who is it that's going to show up at midnight at an account on Friday night when things aren't working well? What happens if they run out of one or more products in between orders in the warehouse? So this is one I've seen a lot. So say the distributor is really, really concerned about managing their costs, and they only want to pick up from you once a month. So they do their best guess and they pick up from you, and then they find that one of your beers, maybe on promotion, is selling much better than they thought, and they're now out. Well, you don't want to lose those shelf spots. You don't want them to lose those shelf spots. Are they going to be willing to figure out a way to get more of that beer? And then it's also on you too. Some breweries are not willing to sell less than a pallet or some weird amount of beer. We used to try to do it by the layer for smaller, in smaller instances instead of by the pallet. We didn't want all of a pallet of something. We only needed half a pallet or 2/3 of a pallet or even just a layer of each beer. You need to be able to be flexible, but you need to know that they're willing to do this troubleshooting and that they're willing to consider that their problem and that it's important. Um, how are upset retailers handled? Again, is that going to be handled by you and they're going to let you know? Is it going to be handled by them and you're going to let them know? Who is the retailer calling? And do they care? I assume they care. If they're a decent distributor, they'll certainly care. But if they're going to blow it off and it's going to damage your sales, not so great. How are out of stock, out of date, and recalls handled? Ask them. What do they do when these situations happen? They happen. Do they have a system for it? How do they ensure, and how can they guarantee to you that if there's a problem, say there's a problem with canning and your cans are exploding, for lack of a better situation. So you've got stuff in the market that needs to be removed and replaced with product that's not going to do that. How is this distributor going to handle that with you and for you? How is breakage on the truck handled? Um, that's a contractual thing. A lot of times they'll say breakage on the truck, we split 50-50, or breakage on the truck is all you, breakage on the truck is all them. Obviously, if they've already purchased the product and this is on the way to the account, it's something that they need to replace, but how do they go about doing that? Do they write it on the invoice and then somebody comes back through later and fixes it? What's their solution for that kind of issue? They need to have a plan for these things in order to ensure that you get the best idea, that they're doing a great job in their business and making sure that your product is well represented. Okay, I need to hustle here. Supplier coordination in the market. You need to be able to do stuff with them and communicate with them. In some cases, the wholesaler is not interested in you interfering with their drivers or their sales reps. And in some cases, you may be kind of on your own solo in the market trying to figure out how things are going. Not optimal. It may be necessary for one reason or another, but it's certainly not optimal. And it may be that if that's the general policy, that over time you can let their sales reps know that you've got their back. You're willing to work with them. You're willing to take some of the problems and fix them. You're willing to do some brand growth and let them know when there's orders to be taken, and that they've got an account that's really excited. But initially, you want to ask questions. Can you do ride-alongs with their sales reps or their drivers? Can you coordinate sales calls with reps in the market and meet them at the account? Do they tag team with brewery reps for orders, features, merchandising? All this stuff is stuff you want. Can reps independently expand their territory for a supplier to new accounts? So if you find the sales rep and say, hey, there's this new restaurant that's going in around the corner and I've already talked to them and they're really excited about carrying our product, can they just add that account to their list, or is there some protocol that they have to go through with their office, with their accounting team, with whoever? Good to know about that. And then stagnant to successful. Have there been instances of brands that did not succeed in their market? You need to know that, and they need to own that. If there have been and they're willing to talk about it, what happened? Did the brand pull out of the state? Did they go to a different distributor? Did they simply go out of business? What's the situation? Would they feel an obligation to consult and jumpstart sales if problems arose in the market through no fault of the brewery? Say pandemic. That's a bad example because it's so real. But would they consult with you? Would they come talk to you? Would they work with you to figure out how to strategize if unusual market situations showed up? It's important that you're partners all the way through, no matter what. And you need to have that representation upfront when you're signing the contract, because that's the best time when you have leverage. They want you and they need to promise you that all this is going to happen. And you need to have it in writing as much as you can that all of this is real and they're going to make a commitment that it's going to happen. What happens if the brand is growing faster than they seem to be able to respond to effectively? This happens. The brand can outgrow the distributor. And you need to hear about it. And just the promise of, oh, that'll never happen. That'll never happen. We can keep up with anything you can do. Ask the question. Ask the question. What if it's more inventory that they're willing to carry? What if it's just too big a drop? So are they going to add a driver? Are they going to add a sales rep? What can they do? And this is particularly appropriate for small distributors. I'm coming in with an established brand. I feel like it's going to do really well. What happens if I outgrow you? Will they increase their inventory to accommodate? If not, are they willing to add orders and deliveries as needed to keep it up? Will they add sales reps? Will they add drivers? Will they add trucks? You need to know that they're willing to do that. And then are they willing to work with you to leave if problems are not being resolved? You always need to be aware of your franchise laws and be super educated. And walking into that interview with that distributor, you need to make a point of reviewing that franchise law and making sure you know exactly where you're working with that. There are always distributors that trade brands. There's distributors that make things happen, even though the state laws may not necessarily technically wish it so. But you may be stuck with that distributor for life. And so you need to talk about these too big too little problems as well. Andrew, thank you for the time check there. I'm really wrapping it up here. To summarize, is there a way to absolutely identify an awesome distributor or an awful distributor? So, no. I don't know why my slides got weird. No, one size does not fit all. So really quick point, if it's good for one brewer, this distributor, that does not necessarily mean they're going to be good for you. The best partnership is not always the one that's the best partnership for your neighbor. And you need to at least interview 3 different distributors just to have a point of reference when you're going into a new territory. And the grass is not always greener. There is a cycle for things. The bigger distributor has more sales reps, has more accounts, has more money, has more printing and fancy things going on. So they're obviously the best choice. And then when you get there, you realize that maybe they don't even know that you exist and nobody's talking about your brand and you're not getting the sales you want. And so you want to go back to the little guy who cares about your brand and understands craft beer, but they're short on finances. And so there's kind of this grass is always greener cycle. And you need to understand that going in so that you can prevent yourself from falling into that trap. So ultimately, the best way to make your selection of distributor partner is to be as informed as possible. And you always want to allow yourself the option of not finding a good partner. You have no obligation at any time to go into any territory with a formal distribution agreement. You need to allow yourself the option that there is not a good partner in that area right now and look at a different territory, because there's nothing worse than forcing yourself to choose somebody who's obviously not a good fit and ending up with a mess that you're stuck in. So it's best to pivot, go a different direction, come back to this territory later if there's not a good partner that you're seeing right now. So yes, do not try to fit a square peg into a round hole. It benefits neither the peg nor the hole. You need to be sure that you're not the peg or the hole and that you try to go into a space that feels comfortable and positive, and they're excited to see you just as you're excited to partner with them. So I have some time for Q&A. I think technically I was pretty close, Andrew, but I do have time for questions. Jenna, thank you for my note, and you're so welcome. Does anybody have questions for me today? I'm more than happy to answer them. You can also find me at any of these websites, distributioninsight.com, customized craft beer programs, Start a Brewery, or Big Beers Festival. I am Laura at customizedcraftbeerprograms.com and Laura at startabrewery.com and Laura at bigbeersfestival.com. Distribution Insight still just a Hotmail email, but if you're interested in the book, that's available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble and Apple. And I've been considering doing an updated version of it. I don't know when that would happen, but it's good to know that truly all of the fundamental principles about distribution still hold. There are now mega distributors, as we talked about. You don't want to get lost in these huge portfolios. There's brand collectors who sign contracts and have no intent to build a brand. There's people who specifically in their contracts say they're not going to build your brand. That's up to you. They will take orders and they will deliver. And so you want to be super careful that you know what you're getting into, what you're promising to do, and what they're promising to do for you when you sign that contract. I don't see any additional questions on my YouTube world. So thank you all for taking the time. Thank you again to Andrew and the sponsors. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and I wish you all a great afternoon.